I'm Jim,
And I'm Garrett.
and this is Jim
Jim.
and Garrett at the Movies. Welcome to this week's episode of Jim and Garrett at the Movies. We will be talking about all of the movies this podcast. We'll be talking about The Girl in the Spider's Web. We'll be talking about Beautiful Boy and Basketball Diaries. We promised you just Beautiful Boy and Basketball Diaries last week, but you get a special bonus review of Girl in the Spider's Web, and that's only because I saw it and it sort of disappeared from Garrett's theaters over the course of the weekend. So there you go. It's both bonus episode and accidental genius. Before we get started, we'll sort of send our thoughts out to everybody in California. Garrett, you're in that area. My understanding is that you've got apocalyptic smoke in your that it's permanent nighttime. Is everything okay there?
I am in the plume. Stepping outside is risky for my health, but I'm thankfully far away from the fires, so there's no need to worry about me. I have some friends, colleagues, students who likewise are on the verge of things, but thankfully no one who's been seriously harmed. But obviously it's ugly, and it's life in California in the 21st century.
Right. Yeah. Or hopefully everybody. Hopefully everybody makes it out as safely and as okay as can be expected given the situation. But let's turn ourselves to lighter news, like The Girl in the Spider's Web. This film is directed by Fede Alvarez. It stars Claire Foy, Bo Gadsden, and Lakeith Stanfield, among others. This is the continuation of the Elizabeth Salander series of films, the Elizabeth Salander Girl in the Dragon Tattoo series, begun by Stieg Larsson. And there were three films, three Swedish films, starring Noomi Rapace. And David Fincher did a film with Rooney Mara, and now it's Claire Foy's turn to take on the mantle of Lisbeth Salander. This follows a fairly basic plot. Lisbeth steals a computer program that has the power to launch all the nuclear missiles in the world. She does, and then, of course, Russians steal that computer program away from her, and she has to go get the MacGuffin. There are actually two MacGuffins in this film, but I'm not gonna. It sort of strays into spoiler territory. I'm going to start by giving my thoughts about this because I think that there might be a little bit of a contrast between me and Garrett on this one. I didn't hate it. I didn't. I think you can look at this film in one of two ways. You can look at it as a fairly typical genre picture, and in that level, yeah, it's middle of the road. Sometimes people ask me as a film critic, do I see more good movies or more bad movies? And I say that I see more mediocre movies. And as a typical genre pick, this is mediocre. There's a lot of magic computer shit that's sort of yada yada away. There's some characters that are completely superfluous or exist only to dispense exposition into the camera. So there's some bullshit hanging around here, but it'll hold your attention. It's not extraordinary. It's very, very middle of the road. However, if you look at it as a Girl with a Dragon Tattoo film, this is not Lisbeth Salander. This is not the character that we got to know with Noomi Rapace, and even to some degree Rooney Mara. This is not that character. And there's and the main character of those other two films, Mikhail Blomkvist, that character is totally wasted in this film. So if you're going into this expecting it to be a film that picks up where the other films left off, then you're going to be sorely disappointed. But if you go into this as a fairly typical genre pick, then it's going to be middle of the road. Garret, you texted me. You messaged me saying that you hated this film. It was bad, or you texted me that it was bad, and I shouldn't waste my time on it. I wasted my time on it. Uh, so go ahead. I love your hate reviews. Give me a good Garret hate review.
Let me actually start with what I liked about the film, because there are some things that work. Most notably, probably Claire Foy's performance I thought was very solid given the material that she was working with. The direction from a technical standpoint was good. Nice cinematography. Sweden looks amazing in the film. The action sequences were sort of well choreographed from a technical point of view. So yeah, if you can go in and sort of shut off your brain, not worry about little things like plot or character motivation and stuff like that, then I agree it can be a fun film. But as you sort of noted, this is a property that has a heritage, and it's a heritage that I rather liked. I read all three of Stieg Larsson's books. I enjoyed them. I wouldn't say I love them, but I definitely liked Fincher's Girl and Dragon Tattoo. I was hoping that he would follow up with sequels. And I did not read the fourth book, the non-Stieg Larsson book, which was apparently based on his notes. And so I don't know how faithful an adaptation this is, but I really hope it's a bastardization and the novel's a lot better, because this film is just incredibly dumb. I mean, like, so many of the movies that I don't like these days, the core flaw is in the screenplay, and I think that this script is just awful. The MacGuffin is terrible and incredibly difficult to believe. The character actions are irrational and stupid. The relationships between them feel forced and artificial. There's so much sort of plot moving on. It feels like an 8-bit video game from the 80s. Go here to get this, go there to get that. I mean, it's really the kind of thing where, I mean, again, I understand that making movies is hard and screenwriting is hard and it's an unrewarding job, but I swear to Christ, you give me 2 weeks on that screenplay and I could turn in a much better one, sticking to the same basic concepts, but rounding it out a lot more. And I by no means have an inflated sense of how good a writer am. I don't think I'm anything special as a writer, but if that's how bad this script is, I could punch it up pretty damn good in comparison.
Well, I think there's an easy fix, and that is turn Bloomquist into an actual character. I think that's give him a motivation, because he doesn't have a motivation in this film. He's sort of window dressing. He's there to exposit. He's there to he doesn't do anything to really affect the plot. I like a film that's sort of centered around Lisbeth Salander, but there's some real problems with that. Her initial character, our initial introduction to that character, was so cool because she was so mysterious. And once you get behind the mask, then she had that kind of childhood. Meh, okay, I kind of seen that before. And so the answers to all of our questions about her, this film didn't come up with any answers. I think you can structurally switch this around where you make Bloomquist a character, and it becomes a much more entertaining film. And it becomes a much more complex film, because then he wants something from her, she wants something from him, and on and on and on. And we can talk. I don't want to talk too much about what I want him to want, because that gets into spoiler territory. But I think that was where I found the most disappointment, was seeing Bloomquist kind of pushed to the periphery. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's definitely would be a major improvement. Yeah, I mean, one of the central functions for Bloomquist in the original trilogy was precisely that he was sort of the audience's eyes, the lens through which we see Lisbeth Salander, and precisely because we are removed from her, she has this incredible mystique about her. And yeah, when she becomes the central focus, the main character, a lot of that disappears. Now, again, it's not impossible, I think, to make a movie centered on her work, but if you're going to sort of shuffle Bloomquist to the side, you might as well have just left him out entirely, because he no longer serves a function.
Right.
But I mean, there's so many cliches in this.
Yeah.
Kids on the autism spectrum disorder have magic powers. Hackers can literally do anything as long as they get their fingers on a piece of electronics. Yeah. God, yeah, the rogue CIA agent or
Rogue,
NSA
yeah,
agent.
I was
Yeah,
gonna go with the Lakeith Stanfield character, who's
yeah. I
you know,
mean,
this rogue NSA, CIA, whatever
yeah.
agent who,
And so I
uh,
mean, I
like,
don't.
he alone is the one who's pursuing this incredible, powerful computer program. He's the guy that they just sent this one guy, or he goes off on his own. That's insane.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I don't want to get too much into it for fear of spoilers, but yeah, suffice to say, terrible screenplay. I can't believe that they decided to shoot that screenplay.
So what do you give it out of I've got a guess that you're like in a 1-star territory. Is that not true? Or are you
One and a half.
1.5? Yeah, I'm at 2. Uh 2 because I found this film the same way I found some of the most recent Star Trek reboots, and I know that that's a popular film, but I set a higher standard for Star Trek. Star Trek can't just be a good action film. Um, a Girl with a Dragon Tattoo story can't just be another good spy film. There's something extra to that character and to this franchise. One of the things I found about this film is that the mystery was simple. It was fairly easy to solve the mystery, whereas the first one, that was a cold case mystery that was just remarkably interesting. Same thing with Girl Who Plays with Fire and Hornet's Nest. I really liked those mysteries, and that was an element that was missing for this. So I give it 2 stars. It is not a recommend, not a blanket recommend. However, if you're a fan of this genre, you might enjoy enough of this film. Okay, so I'm going to talk real quickly about Beautiful Boy. As I said, Garrett hasn't had a chance to see it. Beautiful Boy it's a good film. Steve Carell is the central character. Plays David Sheff. His son Nick, played by the great Timothy Chalamet, he's addicted to several drugs, including methamphetamines, and the story is about Steve Carell's character, trying to help his son through addiction. I liked the performances of this film, but I think it has the same type of problems that we see in a lot of drug films, where the character is so stuck in the circle of drug addiction that there's very little escalation in the plot. Escalation is sort of a screenplay term that refers to the idea that the characters are going to do the easiest thing first, then go to the second easiest thing, and then finally the plot forces them to up the ante each time they attempt to solve this problem. Steve Carell's character doesn't have much escalation until a sort of third act moment where he comes to a specific realization that I can't really reveal. That moment comes a little bit too early in the structure of the film, that it ended up seeming as though the film didn't have anywhere else to go after that moment, and even up until that, it was sort of spinning its wheels in this cycle of addiction. Now, I understand that that's probably realistic, but as it comes to a really good screenplay and a really good story, it left a little to be desired for me. That said, all of the actors are fantastic in this. Steve Carell, Timothy Chalamet, Maura Tierney, Amy Ryan, who's a brilliant actress and completely underutilized in everything. She should be in every movie. She's amazing. And so I really like all of the performances in this film. I give it 3 stars and sort of a tepid recommendation, a recommendation for those people who have to do all their homework for Oscar season, because this will probably show up in Oscar season, even though the film itself leaves a little bit to be desired in my view. So I know you haven't seen the film. I don't know, Garrett, do you want to say anything before we move on to Basketball Diaries? Or
Um, I have high hopes for it. Again, I think the acting looks great, and I was surprised that it disappeared from theaters. I live in a major metropolitan area, and it's getting Oscar buzz. I just assumed it was going to stick around, but it didn't. So sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate, so be it. But we will you'll probably be able, it might get a re-release. It didn't do very well at the box office. Same thing with girl with the girl in the spider's web, didn't do very well at the box office. Oddly enough, The Grinch won the box office this weekend, which was not something that I was predicting. I thought there might be a little bit stronger showing for these other films. But it might get a re-release once the Oscar nominations come out, and you can tell us what you think if it gets that re-release. Let's move on to The Basketball Diaries, a film that I called The Great Basketball Diaries last week. And as I was rewatching it this week, I was like, oh no, I don't know if this film is that great. I think this is the story of Jim Carroll, a young boy played by Leonardo DiCaprio. His mother is Lorraine Bracco, and there are several famous cast members, none other than Mark Wahlberg, Bruno Kirby, also co-stars. This is a story of a teenager who gets addicted to drugs, several of them, among them being heroin and cocaine, and the spiraling addiction that results from his first act addiction to drugs. I don't know, Garrett, what did you think of this film?
Well, I think, I mean, there's no arguing that the centerpiece of this film is the fantastic performance by Leonardo DiCaprio. I frankly think he was robbed at the '95 Oscars. That year, it went to Tom Hanks from Forrest Gump, if I recall. I love that performance. I love that movie, but DiCaprio should have taken it. He absolutely crushes this performance in so many ways. Even if everything else about the film was bad, it's the kind of performance that could have carried it entirely on its own. But I do think the rest of the film is pretty solid too. I'm actually a fan of Jim Carroll. I have a copy of Fear of Dreaming somewhere on these bookshelves back here. His poetry is great. His music is good. I've actually went back to it and listened to some more of it recently, sort of to refresh my my memory for it. So I was really interested to hear his story. And yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's tough. Lorraine Bracco was wonderful. It's weird because it's a world that's very, very different than mine. But nonetheless, I empathized. I was brought in, and I felt like it carried me along emotionally. So yeah, I think this is a very solid film, albeit a difficult and challenging film to watch.
Yeah, it certainly is just a quick Leonardo DiCaprio was not nominated for an Oscar in this year. It went to Nicolas Cage for Leaving Las Vegas that year. 1994 was the year that Tom Hanks won for Forrest Gump. Quick fact check there. But yeah, I loved Leonardo DiCaprio's performance in this. He's fantastic. I think the same problems that I was bringing up with Beautiful Boy are the same type of problems that I find with this film. It sort of spins its wheels in sort of there are times when these drug films kind of fetishize the pain of addiction, where they spend a lot of time just wallowing in how much, and oddly enough, of course, Nicolas Cage won the Oscar this year, and a lot of Leaving Las Vegas is Nicolas Cage wallowing in the pain of drunkenness. Same thing with this character. I think there are a few really great scenes that just steal the film and that I remember 20 years later. Among them being Leonardo DiCaprio outside his mother's door, begging his mother for some money. I mean, that scene stays with you forever. Yet, as an escalation of the plot, the film kind of spins its wheels. And I like the movie. But I don't think it's great. I don't think it rises to that level that some of the other films that I sort of contrast it with Trainspotting, which is a film that I don't think spins its wheels. I think there is escalation in that film, and I like that movie a little bit more. But this film, it's a little it fetishizes that pain. It really gets into that pain and just stays in that. And I don't know how much we're supposed to feel about those characters and how ethical it is to stay in that cycle for that long. I understand though that it's trying to be real, true to life, true to how it is to feel addiction, so or to be in addiction. So I see the reason why the films do what they do. I would just prefer them to be better. I don't know. Does that make sense? Am I making any sense in this little?
I think so, yeah. I mean, the late '90s, there was a big spat of addiction films. I mean, you mentioned Train Spotting, Leaving Las Vegas, Requiem for a Dream, Permanent Midnight. They all came out within like 5 or 6 years of each other, and so I think there was this real sort of jolt of those films. And I think that, yeah, there can be kind of a somewhat of a ghoulish fetishizing of the whole thing. And I think that the ethical concerns there are fair. At the same time, I do remember thinking that, this film and films like it will probably do a really good job of scaring people away from trying serious drugs. I mean, I remember distinctly being in high school and watching this and Requiem for a Dream later in college and thinking, yeah, that's all I ever needed to think I'm never ever going to do heroin. Um, in comparison to Train Spotting, I mean, Train Spotting I think has some more comic relief. It's a little bit funnier, but also by that same rationale, I think that Basketball Diaries is something of a more serious movie. It's less. I mean, it's not as unremitting as Requiem for a Dream, but it doesn't really sort of give you any breathing room. And in that respect, I think it's more of a gut punch, whereas Train Spotting lets you off now and then, and ratchets the tension up over time. So yeah, I'm not insensitive to your concerns, but personally, it doesn't really bring the movie down in my estimation.
Yeah, that's fair. I I think that you need some of those lighter moments, or I think you need other characters the way Requiem for a Dream does. With a Dream follows those three separate characters, four separate characters, I believe. And uh, by moving back and forth, you're sort of not always in the Jim Carroll frame of mind. This Leonardo DiCaprio is in almost every frame of this film, almost every scene of this film. And it gets to the point where we're just watching yet another scene of this man suffer, this boy suffer rather. It's a great performance in a good film, and I'd say the same thing about Beautiful Boy. Great performance in a good film. So
Yeah, I mean, if I do have any criticisms of it, and I do feel that the plot is a little thin. I mean, there really isn't much going on besides the downward spiraling of addiction and then the division between him and his mom. And again, it's a true story, and I obviously don't know how true it is to life, but you want to stay somewhat true to the actual events. But if you take out the those two elements, you really don't have much of a story left. Now, those are two powerful elements, but only two elements is really, it's asking a lot for those two things. And then, of course, again, the amazing performance from DiCaprio to carry a whole feature length film.
right, yeah. So what would you give this total out of 5?
I give it 4 stars out of 5.
Okay, I'm about 3. 3. Same with Beautiful Boy. I'd give Train Spotting much higher, but Train Spotting is one of my favorite movies of that year, of that era. I love that movie, and I actually really enjoyed the sequel too. But conversation for another day. All right. So we'll move on to our news item. If you haven't heard, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you. Stan Lee, the great Stan Lee, passed away yesterday at the age of 95. He created pop culture. I mean, he created our modern day mythology. There have been numerous obituaries and numerous tributes and commemorations of his life on Twitter and in entertainment press, and we're going to add to that. He was a pioneer of he was not only a pioneer of pop culture and superheroes and superhero comic books, kind of modernizing them and really popularizing them. He didn't invent the comic book genre, and he didn't invent the superheroes. Those were previous to his coming in, but he certainly popularized them. And what he has done and what his characters have done in cinema has been game changing. I think X-Men is the first superhero film that really took things seriously. We had the Donner Superman movies in the 80s or in the 70s and early 80s. Those kind of fell by the wayside. Marvel had some issues in the 80s, giving some pretty crappy superhero movies, but it was Stan Lee's characters in the X-Men that kind of ushered in this idea of, all right, we're going to take these characters seriously, and we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe now, which is, like it or not, one of the most influential film franchises in American film and in our modern day pop culture. And that's not, you couldn't have had that without Stan Lee. He was also a pioneer of race relations. He wrote numerous columns decrying bigotry and racism back in the 60s when it wasn't fashionable to do so. He was a leader in that regard, and he will be sorely missed. I think they did shoot some Stan Lee cameos. They shot a bunch of them to sort of plug in later films. I don't know when the last Stan Lee cameo is going to be, but I know that there's going to be some ugly cries in the audience when it happens. Garrett, what do you think?
I distinctly remember reading X-Men for the first time when I was in middle school, and sort of just getting right away that this was my immediate interpretation was a metaphor for the gay rights struggle and for people who feel that they've been marginalized, and fighting for recognition of their basic common humanity. And it was a powerful thing for me. I mean, again, I can't say it's the first time that fiction had a social message, but it was probably the first time a comic book had a social message that I really geared in on. And it's, I mean, really, what can you say? So many stories, so many characters, such great narrative. It's just such a fountain of culture. That's it's a really a testimony to a life that's quite astounding. This isn't my observation. Unfortunately, I can't credit to the right person because I didn't make a note of who it was. It was some person on Twitter commented that that there's a sort of a poetry in that the comic book genre in general is one where they kill off the heroes and you experience that sadness, and then they have a second life. They're resurrected and they're brought back. And in a certain way, that's kind of what's happening with Lee. He's having his dying off now. But he's going to have a non-literal resurrection, but a kind of immortality through his work and through his influence, which, I mean, it brings to mind, of course, that the famous line from Woody Allen about, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it by not dying. Sadly, that's not an option for Lee or Allen or any of us. But if you're into that kind of thing, if you're interested in legacy, then leaving that kind of impact might be the second best thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of challenged to think of somebody who's had more effect on popular culture than Stan Lee. And I mean, I think Walt Disney is a candidate.
J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling, yeah, although she's got one franchise, and I don't know, Lee's got many.
Franchise.
It's a huge franchise, yeah. As we might be talking about next week, there's a J.K. Rowling is a possibility, and I also think that some of the early geniuses of cinema that sort of shaped how we perceive film, like Charlie Chaplin and Orson Welles and Billy Wilder. Some of those might qualify as well. But yeah,
part of what's fascinating about that is that, an awful lot of what we love about Stanley's creation, Stanley himself didn't create, right? He just creates a template, he creates a world, a couple of characters, and then later writers and artists take those ideas and run with it, and they make them their own. And it, Lee obviously is the progenitor of many of these, and also contributed, of course, to other ones that you didn't actually create. But it creates a fantastic web of sort of family intercreation and crossbreeding of creative intellects over decades and decades of work. And it becomes kind of tricky because, of course, you want to give credit to the other people who contributed to this. You don't want to give the impression that Lee was somehow a sort of a one-man show, and obviously he had an incredible team of people working with him. But I would be very surprised, and I certainly have not yet to see anyone from that incredible network of people say the slightest bit of bad thing about the man, and that working with him was just such an incredible honor. And so the idea of being able to be a part of such a network of creativity is, I wouldn't say it's completely unique, but it's definitely rare, because J.K. Rowling has only created one real universe. George Lucas only created one real universe, but they were much more in control of their respective universes, whereas Lee was able to sort of just migrate, and Johnny Appleseed, so many different stories. It's a hell of a creative position to be in.
He's sort of the Gertrude Stein of comic books, right? Everything happened in Gertrude Stein's living room, and everything happened in the Stan Lee living room. I like that. I like that idea. That's sort of a good way to close on. So, all right. So next week, Fantastic Beasts, Garrett.
Yes.
And Godfather. Let's do Godfather because it's our show. What the fuck?
Yeah, we'll do it.
Yeah. To our listeners, Garrett recently rewatched The Godfather. He was talking to me about it last week. I haven't watched it in a few years, and so I want to rewatch The Godfather. He already rewatched it. We're gonna do the fucking Godfather.
We're doing The Godfather.
It doesn't pair with Fantastic Beasts.
So far,
but it's our show, so we're gonna do The Godfather. So we will be talking about The Godfather and Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald next week. Until then, I'm Jim.
And I'm Garrett.
And this has been Jim and Garrett at the Movies.